Mrs. Abhisekar. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will go on to the panel discussion. Let me first invite the panelists to join us on stage. We have Mr. Aj Vignaraja, former Managing Director and Senior Advisor of Stax Inc. We also have Mr. Chanakya Desanayake, Director and Country Head of Kopal MBA, Mr. Hasitha Premaratna, CFO of Brandix Lanka, and Mr. Ranan Herath, Managing Director International of DeVry Education Group. The session will be moderated by Ruini Karunaratna. Can I invite the panelist as well as moderator to kindly join us on stage?
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presence today for the panel discussion. So I would like to start the discussion by actually having an open-ended question to all of you all. In terms of Sri Lanka, taking into consideration of the education system, we see that on international education, it's coming towards a very colonial background. And there are many other international educations out there itself. So we would like to know in terms of how would US education system distinctly differentiate from the others out there in the market today. Arch, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. My view is I think there's two ways that I look at it. I think, again, based on my experience personally, I'd see the US education, I look at it as both, I would say, real world and real time. What I mean by that is I think the folks who teach, and particularly at the graduate programs, the MBA level programs, what I found is that most of the faculty were real world practitioners. So, I remember, when I was taking a class in entrepreneurship, the professor himself was a true entrepreneur. He had bought and sold a number of small companies, not, he wasn't a Bill Gates or anything by any means, but clearly somebody who understood entrepreneurship, had run a company, had bought and sold companies. So when he came into the classroom, you could immediately feel it was not an academic exercise. And there was a lot of value in having him educate us on the rules of thumb when, for example, valuing a company. Everybody talks about discounted cash flows, and you're saying, look, that's an imaginary construct, right? You can, jimmy up your future projections and discount it back, and you create a false valuation. What is a real, how do you value companies in the real world, particularly small businesses, if you're looking to buy? So that was a very real world experience for me, and I think that was repeated across, whether it was an academic subject like statistics, even very, very true and very real in terms of the real-time aspect was much more about the education being very relevant. So we were, again, the syllabus, the information we were being exposed to was happening in a way where we knew these were issues that were being dealt with in the market today and over the next, let's say, 5 years. So in that time frame, you could grapple with, or you could work with, play off against these new ideas. It wasn't some dusty, archaic models and theories that were being, inculcated, but real stuff that was happening in the world. And we were being asked and exposed to those models, events, those companies. So you also had opportunity to see how companies had put some of these issues into practice and place. So I think that, to me, those two sense of a real world and real time made a significant difference.
Thank you, Arch. So from what we actually understood, we clearly see that in terms of the US-based education system, it's more towards the practical side on the work of what's been happening there as opposed to a direct theoretical aspect. So in your experience, since you have engaged in the US-based education side, how do you think that with this particular exposure, can an individual apply to the work life and progress in the career?
Yeah, I think if you have that exposure, and fundamentally what's going to happen in our economy, we are opening up significantly, there's a lot more interest globally in Sri Lanka. Our professionals are going to have to be much more global in their outlook. And they have to be ready, I think, to engage with professionals who are going to come in and who are going to look at investing in Sri Lankan companies. So then you have counterparts across the table that you need to be ready to negotiate with, engage with. You need to be able to tell your story, the story of your company, and tell it in their language as well.
Right.
Plus, you have your local understanding and flavor that they don't have. So you have to have that blend and that ability. I think that's where, to me, what's exciting is if you have some of those skill sets, you're connecting at a peer level. It's not sort of a, big country, small country, or developing economy engagement. You have professionals who can engage one-on-one and make the best case for your country, your company, and for yourself. So I think, yes, it's immediately applicable.
Yeah. Ryan, would you like to comment as well on this aspect of the US education system and how it could help on the career growth?
Definitely, yes. I mean, I obviously grew up here in Sri Lanka and moved to Canada and now live in the United States. So there is a distinct difference in how programs are structured, how programs are delivered, and also how they are designed. Particularly with DeVry, we do not start our design and development of the program with the content, curriculum, and the theory. So we really start looking at the end user, if you think of it as a product, which is the employer, the industry, and the businesses. So we look to them and we see what they are looking for, and we work with the top companies like HP, IBM, in terms of deciding what actually goes into the curriculum.
So working backwards.
Working backwards, indeed.
Right.
And when you do that, what happens is we enable our professors and who enable our students to really develop a skill set. I would differentiate that from knowledge. A skill set where they are able to go in and apply that from day one when they go into the workforce. So start with the end, develop a program that would be in demand by the employers, and then Arj mentioned a very important point, which is who is actually delivering this program. DeVry generally looks at people with lots of industry experience. At a minimum, we look at 5 years relevant experience before somebody takes on and teaches a subject. So input from the industry, professors from the industry, and the delivery method is one of not absorbing content and being able to memorize. It's one of being able to understand concepts and also be able to apply them in real life situations. So those are the three elements. So start with the end, with the businesses, then have professors with industry experience to deliver it and facilitate learning, and then allow the students using real world examples to be able to apply it in real life situations. So that would kind of sum up the essence of how we do things.
Right, right. If I may ask as well, when you look at a potential MBA, we generally, in terms of the Sri Lankan context, we look at, is it there in the top university list? Are we going towards migration? Is that why we're looking at an MBA, or can I get a promotion? These are the basics as to why sometimes individuals do look at an MBA. But when you look at in terms of how DeVry is being structured, it's very much towards on a backward approach where initially the curriculum is on industry-based exposure that is being guided right throughout for the students to get more exposure on. If I may ask to Mr. Hasida in the panel as well, in the middle managerial level of Sri Lanka, what do you think what's lacking with the middle managerial corporates, and how can an MBA help support this for their career progression?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that need to be looked at is from the students who come out of colleges and then join the corporate world. Generally, you find that they are very much thorough with the theory sides, and suddenly when it come to the application, there is a struggle that comes in. So that's one thing that lacks sometimes in the system, where people struggle to apply what you really learned in your academic career or your degree or wherever. Apart from that, the other big thing is that ability to multi-skill, because today's world will definitely require you to do multiple things. while maybe a financial guy, but then you need to think through on the IT side, the strategy side, a few other functional areas need to be looked at by an individual when you're looking at your job profile. But broadly, one thing that I've noticed, people are still not looking outside the box. You see, that's one thing that probably the foreign education does better than the local education, because probably in our school life and college life we are very much taught and spoon-fed, as opposed to maybe a lot of foreign education, especially the MBAs, etc. There is a lot of work that goes in for students to think, articulate and come out with the output, then sort of giving it your plate and asking a question. So that is a very important area which probably comes with foreign education, something that the Sri Lankan system should adopt and incorporate, because that automatically brings out of the box thinking.
Right.
You think outside, you think differently, you start coming out with solutions than maybe trying to relate things within a box. So those are, I think, few of those. You can go into a lot of details, but I'll just keep with that.
Of course, of course. Actually, I very much agree from what you said on the thought process of the Sri Lankan education system. How we've been taught actually from infant stage, from school, and right throughout most of the graduate programs. It's been, I would say, very one way, where we go to a lecture room and then we sit there and we want to see what the lecturer would want to teach us, instead of having a very two-way engagement model, whereas the two-way engagement model would give a lot of insights into what new is happening. And in this program, we have seen that there is an approach of a blended learning model here, in terms of, I would say, in a very online learning basis, where the student could get engaged not only in terms of their peers locally, however, they get exposure to their peers internationally and globally as well. So if I could direct this to Chani here, because you have had much exposure on the blended learning and the e-learning methodologies, how would you see this as a positive aspect for a student who's engaged in terms of reaching out to another peer globally at the outset? How would that help them in their career?
Yeah, so we as a firm during the past 3 years, for our core, our company is all about investment research that we provide to global investment banks and asset management firms. So internal training and knowledge management is a huge part of our core delivery process. We hire smart graduates in many countries, but we train them almost through like an 8-week intensive program before they get to work on investment research related tasks. So during the past 3 to 4 years, we made significant investments in various forms of e-learning and online training platforms, where some of our very well established classroom sessions were given to our trainees on the online platform. So few things that we realized is that the initial reaction for most people within the organization was that, oh, I mean, are we going to learn things off a computer? Will there be constant reinforcement? Will it ever be the same as a classroom experience? Things like that. But after 3 to 6 months, we had people actually giving better feedback on online training sessions versus instructor-led sessions. Few things, because you can self-pace your learning, right? And you can discover new things because there is constant reinforcement, ability to practice case studies, and when a human trainer is delivering a session, there is always a limit on the time, limit on the amount of reinforcement that you can provide, and limit on the amount of face-to-face interaction. But sometimes the online training platform removes all those limitations, and technology is something that is constantly evolving. The modern e-learning content design specialists can actually go even beyond a physical classroom experience. And we strongly believe that one strong point in US education is that it is the technology leader when it comes to almost everything. So online training is very much here to stay because it gives a self-paced environment, better consistent reinforcement that is simply not possible in a pure classroom environment.
Thank you. And another thing, if I may ask, the reach of online training is definitely going to give you more reach to your global peers as opposed to doing an MBA in Sri Lanka and having the Sri Lankan mindset on progressing with your education and learning, etc. So that gives more opening for an individual to apply on, okay, how could this marketing strategy be based on US? How can this marketing strategy be carried out in terms of a Malaysian or a Philippine market? So we see that these mindsets would differ and the reach of a particular peer is going to be much more higher. And will that be an advantage when you look at your career at a next level of a global approach? When you're looking at, as let's say, if you want to progress yourself into a managerial level, having multiple other markets and managing multiple other countries, how would you see this exposure benefiting for an individual?
Yeah, so I think the modern economy that we all operate and we work in is essentially a very much of a knowledge economy, a very much of a digitized commercial world.
Okay.
So what is important for most of the mid-level professionals is to also develop learning skills, because most of the traditional industries are undergoing massive amount of disruption from new players enhancing technology, whether it's in the taxi services market with players like Uber doing lots of disruption, or it could be even in countries like India, players really leveraging the urbanization and technology, introducing very disruptive ways to even deliver groceries to people's homes. So a professional embarking on an MBA benefits from networking and as well as having the access to the best practices. And some of the advanced economies are the places that some of these best practices are developed. An online platform is simply a more efficient way of networking, and sometimes it's a better time to market in terms of a new course. It's very easy to launch it on a global platform than purely limit it to a few hundred students on a classroom environment.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rani, would you like to add to that as well?
Yeah. You know, most of the things we live in kind of a very dispersed but highly networked world today. And that's what you were alluding to, and I totally agree with that. And as you were saying it, I was just thinking to my own team, where I'm based in Chicago. I have team members in San Francisco, in Columbus, in Miami, in New York, in DC, Dubai, New Delhi, and Shanghai. So just think of a time when I'm doing a team meeting. Right, so it's going to be different time zones. So now think of the kind of people in this highly networked and highly diverse and spread out teams that function and that needs to be able to navigate this and needs to be able to work in these environments, and this is more and more what is happening. Rewind that situation to the classroom. Okay? We are used to going to a class. We are used to going at a particular time and sitting down and everybody gathering like this. And coming here, you know so many things that's going to happen. There is rain, there is traffic, so many things going to happen. And some people with the best intentions couldn't show up. Others did show up. And similarly, in the classroom, what's happening is we are pulling students from around the world to gather and to learn together. And you build a tremendous network of people around the world, and you learn, and you exchange ideas. So just think how incredible the situation would be when a student in Colombo is logging in and going into a course shell in the night and sees all the different perspectives, points of view shared by a whole bunch of students in the US, coming from different industries, as well as some students from Europe, for example, and maybe some other students from Sri Lanka. So the learning and the network is going to be diverse, spread out, but highly connected. So our methodology that we are using here really ties into how the future, the workplace is going to be. It will be more virtual, more dispersed. So I think that's kind of what was going through my mind when you were saying that, and I think it's so true. And it's like earlier, Arj, myself, we were talking, and you know, when new things come, as humans, we're all very skeptical. So talking about the examples, what was the example earlier that you used? When cell phones came, you were saying that many people said, like, who needs a cell phone? And but today, I'm sure all of you in the audience has a cell phone. Then we were talking about the cars, right?
Cars,
automatic
yes.
cars. Like, oh my God, no, don't buy automatic. It's really bad, right? So similarly, we went through this phase with online education in the United States more than 10 years ago. But today, in a marketplace where we have a DeVry campus as well as online options available irrespective where you are, we actually have students self-selecting to register for more online programs than on-campus programs. And the student could be two kilometers from the campus. It's not a question of proximity. It's a question of convenience, flexibility, and actually it's quite engaging.
Thank you very much. If we could take a step back, and I would actually like to ask from Hasta, based on your education, experience, and lecturing exposure that you've had, I would like to ask you, what are the key factors a candidate need to consider to focus when they're looking for an MBA?
So I think for, the key thing again comes up with how people look at their career. For example, if you're looking at staying in Sri Lanka and looking at developing themselves in their existing organization, or maybe making a career move to a different organization, moving within functions or taking different skills. So you need to look at where you're heading and where you want to go. So that's your objective really. And then some, as you started off by saying, some are looking at MBA purely from a migration angle. So that's another angle to look at. So you need to know what you want. That's number one. So if somebody is looking for MBA, first you have to set your objective and see, what do I want to do, where do I want to end up in maybe 5-10 years time, and then start thinking around how a MBA could help. So essentially when you say MBA is a qualification. So if you are inside a organization, one can always say, I'm a firm believer of on-the-job training as well, because that's one of the things that really gives you, the growth and the type of input that you're required to perform a particular job or a task. But having said that, if you're looking at going outside and expanding your role, growing yourself further, you definitely need to look at external qualifications that can give a more global view, give a more sort of a technology-driven, a new generation type of approach. And in the meantime, if you're in an organization, one of the other problems you have is that always you're seen as that junior who joined the company, right? You joined as executive and trying to go through the ladder. But every time you try to go through the ladder, you're that boy who came as a school leaver or as a 23-year-old student, but you may be 35, 36 years old now. So then when you have little external recognition, MBAs, qualifications, adding on, they keep knocking at the bosses and the seniors and say, hey guys, look, this guy is qualified from this university, has done this MBA with these type of things. So that gives you a different perspective to where you stand in the organization and to show up. Otherwise, you'll be that boy who walked in at 23, So you need to consider all these factors when you're selecting your MBA. There are a lot of aspects to consider. It's not about just setting a set of objectives and trying to select something. And most of the time, people keep asking this question. What should I do? What should be the best MBA? Should I go to Colombo University, or should I do international thing? Should I look at going to US and doing MBA? So my answer generally to people in simple language is that what do you see, or where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years time? Where do you aspire to be? And based on that, let's try to put the boxes and start ticking one by one and to see where it really comes from. But one thing I've seen is that I myself did an online MBA. So in 2005, when I did my MBA, there were too many people who in Sri Lanka who had done online MBA, so some thought I was crazy. But my main reason, if you ask me today, why did I do that online MBA? Because of convenience. I didn't want to break my career. I also wanted to do something international type of MBA. So I was thinking, how do I do that without breaking my career? Because otherwise I would have to go out, spend maybe a couple of years and come back. By that time you would have lost a little bit of momentum and touch, especially when you're building a career at a young age. So it's important to consider where you are in your career and what you really want to be. It's multiple aspects when you're selecting your MBA.
Precisely as you suggested, I think, of course, in the US itself, the number of students who are engaged in online learning is the US students themselves. Predominantly, just as you mentioned, because of the time, taking into consideration the time, as well as the cost element. So, if I could also ask another question on, there is a norm out there in the market of, for you to do an MBA, you need to have a certain level of maturity. And I would like to ask Arj, why do you think about this norm out there? Do you have to have a certain level of maturity if you are to do an MBA? Or does that MBA would give you that sense of maturity?
I do believe you need a sense of maturity in the sense that you need to have a good few years of work experience under your belt. I actively discourage people who right out of an undergrad or a professional qualification go immediately to an MBA. Now I don't know if that's the correct answer, but in the sense I actively discourage people and say get some work experience because you will grasp a lot more from an MBA when you can relate what's being the concepts to actual work situations, and that suddenly it's a much more clarity, much more value to yourself if you have a few years under your belt. So to me, one option, if you're doing it part-time, then you're working and doing it, which is what I did as well. I did an MBA evenings and weekends while working, and I also didn't want to leave the organization at that time. It was a very interesting stage in the company's growth, but I also wanted to get this external exposure, so I kept working while doing the MBA. So you had 2 years of an MBA program and work as well. So that really, I thought, made my time also a lot more efficient. You really, and you're juggling, you just got married, all of that comes into play, and you figure out how you really tighten and manage your time. But maturity-wise, you having the work experience and doing the MBA or having a few years under your belt and then embarking on that, I think my view is that it's an important thing.
Ryan, would you like to comment on this?
No, I agree with that. But what I don't agree on in a general concept out there is requiring a certain number of years. Maturity is a mindset and a framework. The maturity experience is not gained by a certain number of years or a certain number of projects or level of experience. But that maturity and the experience would tremendously help somebody to think and, like you said, relate to how does this even work, right? So a concept or a theory, anybody can read it and memorize it. Some may even understand it. But if you ask the same question of an audience who quite well reasonably understands a theory or a concept, they'll be able to explain it, but what it means to them and how they can use it could be vastly different. So my answer is yes, you need some experience and you would need some level of maturity, but I think some people get that early on, some people need more time and more kinds of experience. For our MBA, we don't require a certain number of years, and partly, frankly, in the US, almost all our students in the MBA are working full-time. I honestly have not met anybody who is not working and just doing the MBA. It's also a life skill that you're going to develop because there are so many things you need to be able to doing at the same time. So that's part of the skill where you learn how do you balance your family, your job, projects, so many other life's priorities that keep planned or unplanned happening to you, right? And how do you balance all these things? So that's part of the experience. And we come from the point of view, we know that everybody in our MBA has so many other life priorities going on. Nobody's a full-time student. Life's too kind of short for that after you graduate from college. So, you know, so that's kind of my perspective. It's not maybe not a direct answer, but that's kind of a perspective I have that I felt would be valuable sharing.
Yeah, definitely. So maturity is not very much that you could judge in terms of the number of years of work experience, but on how you have engaged. Due to the benefit of time, I would like to open the questions to the audience out there. If anyone would like to ask questions to the panel out there.
If this was a DeVry classroom, we would be flooded by now.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, one question.
Okay, since this is online course, how do we define the time for classes, you know, since the time frame is different each places, and how do we interact with the students? We want to, in MBA class we have to have interactions.
Right.
And you know, how do we develop leadership, how do we develop communication and all these things, how do we develop those things? The main objective of doing this MBA class in local market, we do the job and we have to be in, you know, leading or in our organization, we have to have the presence in our organization. How do we include that kind of a thing online, kind of a program?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked the question. We are going to cover a little bit of that in our presentation as well, but let me answer that. So our method is asynchronous. Essentially, this is synchronous because you guys are here, we are talking, you're asking, I'm replying right now, it happened. If you are here, great. If you weren't here, they'll have to look at the video and they'll catch up, right? So this is, if this was in the context of a classroom. Our methodology is asynchronous, so it is not real time. The best way I can explain this is, how many of you, by show of hands, use Facebook? Okay, so a lot of you, okay. So Facebook is asynchronous. You can put an update. So in that frame of mind, think of how the professor does. So class is structured in blocks of weeks. And each day, the professor is going to engage you on discussion topics, assignments, and progress that block through the week. And right now, folks in Chicago are waking up and they're starting their day. And some of those people might be, the professor might be posting what are the discussion points, reading materials, notes, videos, different things today. For us here, the student in Sri Lanka might be going back home after work and looking at it and answering. So what happens is, through the cycle of a 24, 48 hours, this thing progresses into the discussion. It's not real time, but the discussion progresses. The benefit is, everybody didn't have to come here at the same time for that dialogue to happen. So multiple dialogues are going to continue through the week, and all this happens in a platform called a course shell. We use a technology called eCollege. It's a proprietary platform that's used to build the program. And the course shell has all your material, including your books in the format of ebooks, and all the notes and so many different resources that you have. Within that, you will form your groups, you will engage with your peers. Over and above that, there would be videos, lectures, invitations for different interactions, and the groups may agree to do Skype meetings and different things like that. So it's all of those things, but it's centered around what we call a course shell. Technically, it's an asynchronous delivery where it's not real time, but the conversation progresses to time. So that's kind of the modality. And as I said, why this ability to do this becomes more and more important, because it's very difficult in the world. Everybody's living in different places. There is more remote work, there is more flex work, there is so many different concepts that are coming up, where this kind of ability to manage and be successful in that environment translate directly into the enterprises of the future and even today. So that, hopefully I answered your question to some degree. And if by the end of the presentation you still have questions, we'll take this up again and talk after the presentation as well. But thank you so much for asking that.
Thank you, Randall. Is there any more questions we could ask the panel? All right. Thank you very much. The key insights or the takeaway that we've actually got through this panel discussion was very much out from what you said on how the education system is based on real world and real time. And that was definitely thought through Ranil when he mentioned that how the US-based education system is focusing on the industry learnings as opposed to immediate theoretical learnings. And this could be very relevant for a peer who's in education, for them to actually apply in their real life context of their career as well. And Chanakya, of course, took our interest towards the real work-life practices, because when Corporal Amber was actually going through a merger, this is when they adopted the e-learning progress. So we are in this discussion talking about an MBA and the blended learning approach. However, already corporates out there, especially multinational organizations, they're already on the blended learning approach to ensure that the trainings would be engaged at a very efficient level. So taking into consideration how the corporates have already engaged with this e-learning approach, and taking into consideration of how relevant that as Sri Lankans we need to gain now not local exposure, but as well as globalized exposure in order to progress with our career. So these were the key takeaways on our panel discussion today, and thank you very much, gentlemen. Thanks a lot for your insight.